So thank you so much, everybody, and especially colleagues from the Netherlands and from the States, for another episode of the Trainer podcast, and where I try to bridge the gap between science and practice, and vice versa. And this time, we got another pioneer. We just talked about Terry and me. We talked about generations, but Terry is a generation even before Ken Murray and all the other pioneers of the field. And Dr. Wollert, I'm not sure if this is still actual, but this is your great book, together with Jeff Quail. And well, your bio is you're the president of the Performance Improvement Institute. You provide scenario-based training to law enforcement, and you served in the U.S. Air Force and went on to become the Principal Investigator of Stress Research at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. There you published some great studies, so I'm also curious what that center is. And of course, you published a lot in this really great book. I mean, it's you see the papers in it. There's so much information into it, and you also manage it to make it practical. I also wrote a book.
I saw that.
Yeah, but
I keep hoping to get a copy of it.
Yeah, of course you can.
But it'll hopefully it's in English so I can read it.
No, it's in Dutch. That's one of the problems. But the only chapter written by Jeff is in English, so you have at least one chapter. But I did not succeed to make the combination of science and practice so good. But thank you so much. And yeah, can you give a short introduction?
I enjoy your, I don't know, what do you call them, posts and stuff of that nature in the LinkedIn sites and that. And I get brave enough to respond to a couple of them every now and then.
Yeah, great.
But you've been making some great posts there, and I enjoy reading them.
Thank you so much. Can you just give a personal overview how you get started into this whole thing of reality-based training? I mean, where were you when you thought, let's do some reality-based training?
Well, I guess you could say that I kind of got drafted into it. You know, I'm a individual from the era of the Vietnam War, and I was one of the lucky few, or many, however you want to look at it, that got drafted into the military during that war. But I was extremely fortunate in that when I went into the Air Force, and this was back in 71, that I stayed at the Air Training Command and was used as a trainer for going through and preparing Air Force and as well as some international students to be able to go through and set up, maintain, and operate radar systems. And while I was there, I got involved in being able to go through and develop some of the curriculum that we used to teach while we were there. And one of the things that we used quite a bit was setting up situations where individuals had to respond to emergencies and get the equipment back up online so that they could go through and, you know, land aircraft, which was, you know, the part that I was involved in was, you know, all of the air traffic control stuff and the identification friend or foe types of situations, which was very important over in Vietnam, you know, that wanted to know whether or not it was a friendly airplane coming in or an enemy aircraft. So that was kind of how I got started into it. Once I got out of the Air Force, I went back to school, and then I got called up into a community college and started into an electronics program. And from there, went into a computer systems type of thing where I worked as a field engineer, as well as I worked out of the training center of preparing people to go in and get systems up and operational again. That was one of the challenges that we had because it was all under time pressure of people being able to go through and respond. Organizations are kind of finicky about having their computer systems up and running. all the time. And so that's kind of where I started getting into that. And eventually then moved over into the nuclear arena, where this was in the commercial nuclear side for utilities. And I worked in the training department of a nuclear facility. One of the things that we were required to do was set up scenarios that replicated, operational emergencies. And then the Nuclear Regulatory Commission would come in and evaluate our personnel as to how well they were responding to those individual situations. And then, of course, the commission evaluators would also throw in a few monkey wrenches just to, excite things up a little bit, and there's nothing like a radiation leak to get people excited about what's going on around.
Yeah, I can imagine.
We never had one, but that was, but we always did exercises to set up to say, okay, how would we respond to, an emergency situation like that? And from the commercial side, I went to the Department of Energy side and did that for nuclear weapons, for the manufacturing facilities that the Department of Energy ran in several places of that nature. And again, we ran a lot of reality-based type scenarios, primarily to make sure that our personnel could respond to some of these emergencies, because we were all there too. So want to make sure that when things don't go well, that they can adequately respond. And from that's when I went to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, which is the center where all federal law enforcement officers go to get their basic and some of their advanced training activities in that. So whether or not they are a uniformed police officer or a criminal investigator / detective type of thing, they all go through the basic program there.
Can you explain what federal means? Because I'm not sure if
that's for the federal government, for the United States.
It's for the
whole country.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we provided support for about 100 federal law enforcement training agencies, which was a unique challenge into itself, because they all do things a little bit different. And I like to joke about, we trained everybody from, the ATF, which is the alcohol, tobacco, firearms guys, to Capitol Police, which protects all of our infrastructure there in DC, including another organization called the Dam Police. And they're the ones that go through and protect all of the dam sites that we have in the country. So yeah, I can honestly say, yep, I've trained the Dam Police.
And this sounds like a big training organization.
Yes, very large. There were multiple facilities. The biggest one was located here in Brunswick, Georgia, which was the primary site. And then there were two sites up north in in Maryland, where we had a training site up there. We have one out in Artesia, New Mexico, and then there are several international sites. Botswana, Africa. There's one in South America. There's a couple of them over in Europe. There.
Wow.
So,
but I heard you talking about what I'm not sure what you were saying. Creating some exercise and situations, even in the Air Force.
Yes.
But so the terms scenarios and reality-based training, did you use the terms at the time? We talking about 30, 40 years ago?
Yes, absolutely.
So nothing new.
No. Yeah, like I said, I was introduced to all of that whenever I was in the Air Force, and continued on with it. Now, I wasn't the only one I did that in the Air Force, but in all of our nuclear facilities, for power generation and what have you, they've been going through and doing scenario-based training there ever since we've had nuclear power facilities. And I would wager to say that they had scenario-based training and stuff that they were doing for the Department of Energy all the way back whenever they were doing the Manhattan Project. So this stuff's been going on since, World War II.
Did we?
There's nothing new. It just keeps getting better.
Yeah, okay, that's the question I wanted to ask. Did we improve a little bit?
We are definitely improving, but and you're probably aware as much as I am, is that in the law enforcement community, there's two things that law enforcement personnel can't tolerate. And that's the way things are or to change. So it presents a lot of unique challenges for us.
Yeah. Well, what a great career. As I mentioned, you produced then some great, how do you call it, projects, the survival score research I found very interesting. Well,
it's been a wonderful ride. I have got to meet some outstanding individuals like Joan Vickers and Jeff Quail and Bill Lewinsky, Ken Murray. I've got to meet a whole bunch of some of the real talent that exists out there.
Yeah.
And like I said, got to work with some really super people.
Yeah. Was there a person, let's say, of your own generation, or maybe a generation before you, of whom you can say that was a very inspiring person before you came on the scene? Were there any training gurus then?
I wish I could remember his name, but there's an individual that was responsible for investigating simulator sickness. And he was doing that for the military. And he was already retired whenever I got a chance to meet with him. And, he did a lot of the things, for, setting things up for military pilot training and stuff of that nature. Creating different types of scenario situations and stuff. And in their simulators, pilots would get sick. Since the term simulator sickness, it's very much like motion sickness, but a little bit different. So he had to investigate different things to find out how to mitigate it. And he shared with me, the one thing that he found that was the most effective at treating simulator sickness and or trying to mitigate it was marijuana. Unfortunately, the military wouldn't let him use it on pilots,
Yeah, I can imagine.
Nothing like sending up an impaired pilot to try to go through and fly a combat mission.
Yeah. I have to ask you then when this background, I have to ask you the question: did you meet John Boyd?
No, I did not. But I did meet some of the people that he was associated with at Georgia Tech. And I've actually been in the room where he came up with the OODA loop concept and where he was at. And, there was people there at Georgia Tech that I met, remembered him while he was there during some of his stuff. But yeah, no, I wasn't.
That would be great to be in.
Oh, that would have been wonderful.
OODA loop class. Yeah.
But there was, like I said, there were some very interesting individuals there at Georgia Tech that had worked with him while he was there. And they were, many of them were in the psychology department where I worked with. So.
Wow.
So.
Well, then about the topic of this conversation, that is, and I have to put it up again. It's in this great book. It's even called reality-based training. Can you for us explain two concepts? Maybe they are related, of course. That is reality-based training and scenario-based training. And in this book, they are integrated together. But what are they and why are they important?
Well, they really look a lot alike.
Yeah.
The only difference whenever you get into from what I would classify as scenario-based training is that, you know, there are exercises to go through and accomplish certain tasks and stuff of that nature in a performance arena type of thing where you know, whether that be, you know, a simulated combat mission or, you know, responding to some kind of emergency conditions and stuff of that nature.
Yeah.
Like I said, in the military, we did it all the time. You know, we always had emergency drills.
Yeah.
And they've even made movies about some of those things, you know, especially the Strategic Air Command. You know, there were some good examples of that in some of the movies that came out of the 50s and 60s and stuff of that nature.
Yeah.
Where they, you know, simulated drills where Russia was attacking us and all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, we had to go through and set up and respond to those things. And I got involved in that in, you know, whenever I was there in the 70s, because part of the radar equipment that we had to take care of was the ones that was monitoring air traffic or whatever, looking specifically for missiles coming across from Russia over Canada, and as well as coming across on the East Coast. So
it looks like we have to put on the radars again, if I'm hearing.
if we ain't careful, we're going to need to be doing that. Yes. It's getting ugly out there.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we feel it also here on the continent here, because Ukraine is not so far away. Not so far.
It's too close for comfort, isn't it?
Yeah, because I talked with a friend yesterday or something like that, and we asked ourselves, what's between the Netherlands and Russia, and we came up maybe Poland and Germany, but then there are we.
Well, Germany wasn't all that helpful during World War II, and Poland wasn't much of a defense.
No, but I hope they are changed now. But
I hope so as well.
Yeah.
I hopefully that, you know, that whole event that happened during World War II was a wake-up call.
Yeah.
But, you know, politicians have a habit of, you know, if the threat is not immediate, then let's waste money on something else besides our military.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always the same, eh?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
And then they try to catch up.
Yeah. Okay, so we have scenario-based training. Then about the reality-based part. Can you maybe explain what do we mean by scenario fidelity? And of course, you did a great job in your book, but is there anything to say about the fidelity of scenarios and how real is real?
And that's always going to be the big challenge of how are we going to go through and deal with, you know, the fidelity of a given scenario, because there's a balance that we have to make between safety and realism.
Yeah.
You know, I guess to give you a kind of a working example of that, something that I've never understood. Most organizations, whenever they certify somebody to be able to use OC spray or to use a taser, you know, an electronic device on there, the students have to go through and experience those things. Well, we also have them use guns, but we don't shoot any of our students intentionally, that is. So I'm not real sure, you know, that's where we see that difference between, you know, realism and safety. Yeah. I personally, I don't care to get sprayed again with OC, and I'm not real thrilled about taking another shot from a taser either. No. Now, I've also been shot, and I don't think I want to go through that again either. That was not a whole lot of fun.
Oh, you were shot? Yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh. But it was a minor injury, but it was enough to get you thinking that, you know, you got to be careful of what you expose.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So and what does that mean for our training? Because there are people who say it should be it should be 100% fidelity. There are people who say in emergency medicine.
Well, whenever we get into reality-based training,
Yeah.
and we're talking about those concepts, if again we're looking at in some cases the fidelity is a major part of that, and that's going through and looking at this whole concept of the elements that we want to deal with in terms of the realism.
Yeah.
You know, there are things like the physical types of things on there, you know, whether, you know, that be the tools, you know, handguns that are realistic and things of that nature. Now, with that as a point, one of the things that traditionally organizations have trained with is, you know, like those little rubber radios whenever they're going through and training students. Well, they're non-functional. In fact, they don't even have a mic cord on them. It's just an extra piece of weight to hang on the belt. Well, what I discovered then, whenever I put them into one of my realistic scenarios where they had the mic cable and they had to use that to be able to go through and contact dispatch or one of their other partners that may be involved in the scenario, they would just go through and holler out the command, you know, say, you know, dispatch, you know, officer such and such, what have you, never key in the mic. And that was, I picked that up because all of the scenarios that I ran in my research, I had multiple video cameras to record where they were, what they were doing and what they said and all of that stuff. So it became a very apparent that was a training scar that we had incorporated, because throughout training, that's all they do is they just tell their instructor, okay, I need backup and what have you. And most instructors don't even reinforce the concept of the right commands and all of the things that they need to go through and giving out the specific instructions of where they want backup to show up, all those types of things, which leads us into another element, which is the contextual environment. You know, are the things, the setting, the stuff of that nature. You know, if you're responding to a robbery in a restaurant, are you actually responding to a restaurant whenever you go in there? And are there multiple role players around that you're going to have to interact and control whenever you go into it? So between physical and contextual, those become very critical components of making it a reality-based training scenario. Now, another part of that, when we get into the reality component and the fidelity, is the physiological stuff. Are they going to have to do some of the things that they need to be doing? Are they going to have to physically control somebody? I'll never forget comments that I heard from several of the students, you know, that had completed handcuffing exercises over in a controlled mat room where they were handcuffing one of their fellow students and that. And then whenever they got into one of my scenarios and they had a resistive role player, but like they never got the handcuffs on. And they couldn't believe how much more difficult it was. And whenever I had my role players go through and go down to be handcuffed, they would be leaning up against a wall or something of that nature that, you know, would make it a little bit more difficult for the student to be able to access the hands and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So that becomes a critical part of a reality-based training scenario. And the last one of these is the psychological component. And that is an area that I think that we have a tendency to neglect. Because what I have found out of my research is that it's the psychological component where it leads individuals to the potential of failing. It's the emotional states that if you have elevated emotional states, which would be like, say, for state anger, if you're at the 60th percentile for that, or if you're about the 78th, 79th percentile in anxiety, that's whenever the performance collapses and it goes into, you know, the crash mode and you fail. So if you're at that point, you got a 91% chance you're going to fail that exercise or you're going to fail a real life encounter. Now,
Yeah. So these,
and
yeah, yeah,
I bring that up because most people focus on things like heart rate to go through and determine how much stress an individual is under. And we have to realize that heart rate is manifested in two different ways. One of those is through physical or strenuous type activities, and the other is through a psychological threat perception. So both of those will elevate the heart rate. But just because you have elevated heart rate does not necessarily mean that you are suffering or that you have psychological stresses that are associated with that type of encounter.
yeah,
And so it takes both.
Yeah.
I'm not discounting heart rate as an indicator. Heart rate is probably the easiest one to measure.
Yeah.
And the most difficult one to measure is the psychological component. Because the only way we can
Yeah.
do that is through post self-acknowledgement of how they felt.
Yeah.
And I got to work with a great individual, Dr. Charles Spielberger, who is probably one of the leading authorities on state trait emotional type stuff. He's done, tons of tests. He got, the state trait inventories that have been translated. I can't remember, but a couple hundred different languages in that's used worldwide. So.
I would like to come back about this when we talk about stress, but
Yeah.
these are the components of the realism, the fidelity parts, and but how to address the gap? But because as you mentioned, yeah, sometimes you don't have for example, if I speak from the Netherlands, sometimes we don't have the right context. I mean, we don't have the restaurant, we don't have enough role players or whatever. Or yeah, is there any hope?
Well, when it comes to role players, that's always a challenge.
Yeah.
Simply from the fact that, whenever you're doing reality-based training, it's expensive.
Mhm.
There's no a way around that, because you got to have the facilities set up to be able to go through and do it. You got to have the role players. You have to train the role players, and you have to manage the role players. You have to have your evaluators in place and safety officers. So there's a lot of moving parts whenever you get
Yeah.
into reality-based training, and those things all add up to time or expenses. And then you got the time element. You can't put 30 people in the same role play at the same time. You got to do them one at a time or two at a time if it's that type of scenario. So, it becomes a very time consuming type of thing. And
Yeah.
whenever you got regulatory organizations or other owners of the students that you have, you get limits on how much time you got to be able to go through and complete the training stuff on there. Most state organizations have a limited number of hours that they're allowed to go through to provide the basic training.
And can we still scale it down? Can we do some, how do you call it? Short scenarios. What I mean, are there any options if we can do this but still use some principles?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I like doing is I'll set up drill exercises.
Mhm.
And that's where a video-based simulation really comes in handy. For example, one that I use that I've developed for the simulator that I use at Santa Fe College, where I teach use of force. I've got an exercise where students have to use a flashlight to go through and they're executing a search warrant. So they have to try to identify, contraband and stuff that they would need to do. And then I will throw a role player in on that, a video-based role player
Yeah.
in the scenario. And I got the flexibility. I can have that role player show up at different places. I can have them either be compliant or non-compliant. I can have them shoot or come out with a knife or whatever, some type of weapon. So it's an exercise that does two things. One is, are they scanning and using the flashlight properly as they're going through and doing it? and secondary to that, are they maintaining situation awareness? And, it gives me an opportunity to observe them going through in a controlled environment where I know where everything is supposed to be, and I can control how the reactions are going to be from the video components on there. So I can change it up so it's, students coming through, back to back, they can't tell their fellow students that, oh, watch out for the guy in the stairwell. He'll sneak out and get you. Well, the next guy may not even get that. He may get something completely different and maybe totally benign.
Yeah.
So it becomes a novel experience for everybody going through it.
Yeah.
But it's a short duration type of thing that takes, maybe 10 minutes to go through and run, and then go through and show them through the feedback, video feedback thing on there of what they did and what they missed and things of that nature. So quick exercise, but it's still a reality-based training type counter.
Great. Yeah, I've also came to the same conclusion because we run, for example, I run 2-day classes for emergency medicines and for ambulance personnel. And we are on a military, how do you call it? A military caserne. I'm not sure how it is. Military, whatever place. But then we have a real subway and so on. But man, we need so much logistics and role players, and I can do that in the 2 days. But if I have only 3 hours, it becomes
it is overwhelming. One of the things that I got to do while I was at FLETC was I was invited to work with the U.S. Army at Fort Benning in Georgia, where they were going through and conducting what they refer to as their top ranger competition. And that was a complete reality-based training environment where, but they were working as a squad, which made for some really unique challenges. But we had, all different kinds of things set up there at Fort Benning for them to go through and encounter. In fact, Jeff was there, so got to work with Jeff on this thing. And then there was a group there, MilSim FX, on it, where they have these explosive devices and stuff that they can set off. Had laser shot there where we had a screen set up where there was a role player in another room that had sensors on, so it was actual communicating two-way with the students that were going through that, or in this case, the Rangers. So they could ask questions, they could respond. And what was interesting, this burly old guy that was the playing the character, but the character on the screen was a teenage girl, and they did all the translations and stuff of that nature to go through and do that. And then we had live role players in there, and there was one event that was just, it was really quite entertaining, where after they talked to that one person, then the female role player left the room and went outside, and then it's before they get out there to see, she's shot, so she's down on the ground, and all of them came and surrounded around that girl and that nature. And that's when we set off an IED device and wiped out the whole squad, because they didn't do their situation awareness. They didn't set up their perimeter watch. None of those things. They just got sucked right in. And it was a very enlightening experience for them.
I can imagine. And talking about after that, how do you debrief such a thing?
I've got a model, and we outline it in the book. And I can't say that I invented that model. I appropriated it. That's probably better than saying that I flat out stole it from the medical profession. And it's a model where they start off, have the individual, you give them their briefing of going into it, and then they actually perform the scenario. And then after they have completed the scenario, the first thing I end up doing is I'll go through and say, okay, now I need you to describe what you did, why you did it, and stuff of that nature. And in my case, from the law enforcement perspective, of saying, okay, I want you to use and describe everything as if you were writing your report for the, the incident debriefing and stuff of that nature. Now, I use that to get them in tune with the types of things that they need to be incorporating in the report so that they're getting practice doing that orally, because most of them would hate writing something fierce, but at least they can go through it orally and start getting the idea of what components they need to be including in there. Now, once they've outlined that and they've given me that description, I may ask them some questions for clarification or whatever, but predominantly the student is doing all the talking during this phase of it. Then I go through and I ask them to identify their strengths. And that's something that I don't see in a lot of the feedback sessions of, going through in the law enforcement community, especially, is I say, okay, what do you think you did well? And have them describe for me, those things that, they felt worked well for them in that. And that's given them some positive reinforcement. But it does one other thing that I discovered quite by accident. I had one individual that went through the scenario was one where there was a very large man that was camped out in an area that was supposedly cleared and for a dignitary type tour. And the student was going in to verify that everything was still clear before the dignitary got there. And they go in, they see this very large man, and the student at this point in time was a very petite female, goes in, sees him, and, identifies herself, tells him very clearly that he can't be there, he's going to have to leave. And of course, he's telling her to pack sand and what have you. So she draws out her baton and she says, sir, if you don't leave now, I will have to use this and then I will have to place you under arrest. Do you understand? And he said, bring it on. So she goes with the baton and he grabs it and it goes sailing across the room. And by the time he turns around to look at her again, she's got her service weapon out and is aimed down on him and said, okay, now get on the ground or I'm going to shoot you. And we were all sitting there saying, wow, man, this was fantastic. Finally we got a student that really understands this process. Well, whenever we was going through the debrief and she was describing what she did well, she says, well, whenever I saw how big that guy was, I thought that if I found a way to give him a weapon, that would allow me to be able to get my handgun and I could use that to control him.
Sure.
And we're all sitting there going, whoa, wait a minute. That's not how it works.
No.
But had we not gone through that element, and like I said, that was just one of those joyous events that we discovered that there was another benefit besides keeping the scenario or the debrief in a very positive fashion.
Yeah.
And all this time, we tell the students, because a lot of them will want to try to come in and say, well, I did this wrong, I need to do that wrong, and whatever. No, we're not interested in that. What we're focusing on, what did you do right? What worked for you?
Yeah.
And so we're keeping it on positive. And then when we get into the next phase on there, it's not like, okay, what did you do wrong? And and ping on them for saying, what they did on there. We're saying, okay, now, if you were to get into this again, what would you do different? So what I'm trying to focus on whenever we're doing that is problem solving skills. That they recognize that something didn't work and can they come up with an alternative that might work out better for them that, could have helped solve the problem. Yeah. And that gives us an opportunity to analyze our problem solving and decision skills.
Yeah.
And then from there, we go into the next phase of it where we maybe change up some things. We're say, okay, what would you have done differently had there been two people that you encountered in there as opposed to the one, something of that nature. Yeah. So again, taking the same contextual environment but changing different parts of it, just slightly to see, okay, can they think on their feet and say, okay, well, this is how I would go through an approach and do that differently. And that. I'm also a very strong believer in video as part of the feedback. Because with that being recorded, then after we've gone through those segments, I sit down, okay, and say, okay, now let's watch the video. And they can see themselves going through and doing some stuff, and they will identify things that they did that they think, I can't believe I did that. I've had them deny that it was them doing it, you know, even though they can see themselves going through that particular scenario. I remember one young lady very explicitly saying, that can't be me because I don't use language like that. And she was extremely explicit during the scenario. It was embarrassing for her. But the thing of it is it takes away the argument that, well, that's not what I did in the scenario. You just got it wrong and stuff of that nature. So there's no argumentative type of thing between what the role player did and what the instructor may be telling them or sharing with them, and that, because it's right there in front of them. And we use that to, again, as part of that. Well, what would you do different, and change the locations around and things of that nature? Continually trying to refine all of that process. Now, for me, one of the big benefits out of going through that process, even though it takes a little bit longer, we actually have some extra benefits. Okay, they go through the scenario. That's the first time that they experience it. Then they have to go through and recall what they did well. That gives them a second opportunity to experience that scenario. Then they describe what they would do different in there. So that's 3 times that they would go through and look at that scenario. Then they would go through and look at the video and things of that nature and look at some of the alternatives. So they've now gone through that scenario 4 times with only 1 presentation. So I'm getting 4 times the benefit with 1 physical scenario.
Do you also use, because here in the Netherlands, we have a model, sometimes it's used, sometimes it's not, whereby we first, I'm not sure how to say it in English, but first we want them to describe their, how do you say it, their mood, their emotions. It's a little bit like some steam out, you know, like how are you feeling or whatever. Is there any room for that in this model?
Yeah, I don't see why not. You know, in terms of being able to go through and do that, either whenever they're going through and describing what they did and stuff of that nature, or as part of, you know, what would they do different? You know, well, how did you, you know, what was your reaction and things of that nature whenever this event occurred? Because within a reality-based scenario, there will frequently be startle events. You know, if you're going through doing a room clearing exercise and somebody pops out and what have you that you have to deal with, whether it's a threat or a non-threat, you're going to get that startle response. And, in fact, this weekend I went through an exercise where I ran some again use of force video scenarios, and the individual that I was running through it, he was presented with an individual that was trespassing, and he needed to, you know, remove him from the property, but the guy had his hands in his pocket all the time. And the officer was telling him, you know, show me your hands. And that's his command, show me your hands. Well, eventually, you know, after he argued and debated with him for an extended period of time, you know, he finally gets his gun out and he goes, says, I'm telling you, show me your hands now. And the guy immediately comes out in a furtive type movement with a cell phone showing him his hands, and he shot him. And, you know, it was an issue and a learning opportunity to go through and deal with the students. And you need to be very careful with what commands you're giving somebody. Because that individual complied with your commands and you shot him for it. That you need to think about those commands.
Yeah.
And so now what did you really want him to do? Well, he says, well, I wanted him to come out with his hands and, open and surrender. I said, well, why didn't you tell him that?
Yeah.
Because if that's what you want him to do, then that's what you need to be telling him.
Yeah.
But, that show me your hands is, again, a training scar that has existed in the law enforcement community forever.
And what would be a better way?
Well, telling them very specifically, say, okay, now slowly remove your hands from your pocket with your palms open, and then slowly raise your hands up over your head. Okay. If you make any sudden moves, I may shoot you.
Yeah.
Now, if they got the hands behind their back, then you would be telling them, said, okay, now don't make any sudden moves. Now slowly turn around and face away from me. So now you can see what they may have behind their back where they got their hands placed.
Yeah.
So it is all what we refer to as alpha commands or situational commands, where you have to look at what is going on in the situation and what do you specifically want that individual to do.
So what was the first one? Alpha command? What was it?
Alpha commands. There's a difference between an alpha command, which is a very clear, concise, directive type statement, versus a beta command, where is one of those things. Like for example, you give them multiple commands. Don't move and put up your hands.
Yeah.
Okay, now which one am I supposed to do? If I can't put up my hands without moving.
Yeah.
So they're conflicting, and that's just the term that's been coined that goes with alpha versus beta.
Great. What do you think about, because I'm struggling a little bit with this. On one hand, it can be very powerful to fail. So for example, you give the wrong instruction, you're being shot at. I personally have learned big things from big mistakes.
Yeah.
And at the same
You
time,
have to tell about it.
Yeah. But on the other hand, it looks like there is a kind of educational pedagogy who states you need positive reinforcements. They have to succeed. But what is your experience?
Well, I agree. I had a professor whenever I was in college that made the statement to me, and it kind of stuck with me. It said, if you really want to learn something, you have to fail. Now, that doesn't mean that whenever I have a scenario set up, that the student is set up for failure. I mean, they can do that all on their own. I mean, every scenario that I design from a reality-based training perspective needs to be winnable. But it needs to be winnable because the student did what he was supposed to do when he was supposed to do it. I also like to incorporate in opportunities that they maybe didn't do it right at this point in the scenario, but they recognize that, and then they can self-correct and come back in and still win the scenario. So I try to build those into the scenarios as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And I do that because it gets very complicated at times. Because one of the things that I do is I lay out a flow chart with decision trees on there that, if you do this, then this is going to happen. If you don't do this, then that's going to happen, type of thing.
Yeah.
And trying to second guess, what the student is going to do. And it's done that way so that I can train the role players.
Yeah.
Because the last thing I want is a role player going on and using his own imagination to how he's going to react, because then I've lost complete control of the scenario and what it was that I was trying to accomplish from a training perspective.
Yeah.
So it gives me that control for training the role players on there.
Yeah.
But it's not fail proof, because just to think you've got it all covered, one of these students is going to come up with something and you're going to be scratching your head and saying, well, where the heck did that come from?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So before I want to ask, I'm not sure how much time we have, so I have to. Do we have?
I'm available as long as you want.
Oh, okay. So I have to catch my daughter later, but I have a little of time also.
Yep, that's one of the advantages of being retired. I can work whenever I want to work, and I don't have to work when I don't have to work.
That's a great ambition for me then.
But the pay sucks.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. So now we talked about a debrief, but what about feedback? And there is a lot of research today about feedback and so on. And I wonder two things about feedback: how to give it, like in your book, student-centered, instructor-centered, but also when to give it. I mean, yeah, during, yeah.
The how, I'm pretty partial to that student feedback model that I incorporated or included in my book. The when is going to depend on what's going on and what the scenario's purpose is. If we're doing what I would refer to as kind of like a lab exercise, where it's a learning process that they're going through to, trying to put pieces together as part of the skills, the application and practice phase of stress exposure training, then, if there is something that, where the student is going off on the wrong tangent somewhere, I may stop the scenario and go ahead and go into a mini debrief feedback session, stuff of that nature, figure out where they were going and get them back on track, and then continue on through the scenario. If it's an evaluation scenario, I don't interrupt the student while he's going through it. I will let them go through the entire scenario, and then we will go into the debrief based upon what I come up with on the evaluation.
Yeah. So there are two. If I'm right, there are at least two types of scenarios: the training,
the training one and the evaluation one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And I might add that one of the major weaknesses that I see out of a lot of reality-based or scenario-based training is the evaluation. It's as you recall from my book, it's a very structured evaluation process where we're looking at specific performance criteria that they have to satisfy during the scenario, and we're evaluating each one of those, as opposed to, okay, we've got a subject matter expert that is observing the student, and then it's kind of a hit and miss as to what all he may cover and address during that feedback session.
Yeah.
Now, the advantage that I see from that structured evaluation process and keeping things focused on, those four components of situation awareness and their physical skills and their decision making and their communication, I now have consolidated where I'm going to be evaluating, and in each scenario, I'm going to be touching on one or more of those components as they go through that scenario.
Yeah.
So that now I can give precise evaluation comments relative to those criteria. And that also helps me from not only the trainee evaluation, but the training evaluation. So if I pick up multiple students having difficulty in a physical skill, for example, I now look at that and say, okay, I've got a problem emerging here. I need to go back in and investigate why are we seeing that.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a specific example of that. I was working with an organization that was transitioning into using the tasers. And whenever they were going through their training, they did all their stuff on there. But whenever we put them into the scenario, and in this case, I used the video scenario where the taser simulated through laser beams the two probes that was coming out of the taser, and the students were unsuccessful. They were missing with one of the probes. And so with the subject matter expert that was teaching the taser training for them, we sat down and we used that scenario, and I set up multiple cameras to observe students going through. And what I found was that they were using a cross draw holster.
Hmm.
And whenever they would draw out their taser, they would come up and they would be looking like this with the taser. And in which case, and they were using the dot on the taser to go through and hit, and they would hit with one taser, but the taser on the bottom was going off the side of the individual. So they had to go back in and modify their training to come up so that they drew, and then they would make sure that their hands were rotated so that they had the lasers vertical.
Yeah.
So that they could have a good hit on there.
Yeah.
So that's just, one example of how, this evaluation process, if you look at it correctly, you can target areas that you need to go in and fix on your training, as well as addressing, deficiencies in the student.
Yeah. Can you come back to the feedback thing again? Last week I was asked to evaluate a training, and they asked me to look at, for example, at the debrief and the feedback. And what I found was a very good training, but it was all instructor-centered feedback.
Yeah.
It means that the instructor was telling what went good and what went wrong. I try to say that maybe it's better to activate the student's perspective also. What is your view about giving feedback in the two styles of feedback for those who don't have your book yet?
Yeah.
You have to buy it.
Well, one of the things that I think permeates our industry is instructors, they really love to hear themselves talk. And they really want to impress upon the students how much knowledge they have. And that there is a clear distinction between student and instructor in terms of expertise. And the instructor is wanting to, share that expertise. And I fully understand that part on there. But as I discovered whenever, I did the evaluation or the research on comparing student-centered versus instructor-centered feedback, there were some very dramatic differences in terms of how the students reacted and performed in following scenarios based upon the type of feedback that they received. In fact, it became pretty obvious. It had one instructor that he really hated having to be the person giving the instructor-centered feedback. And his name was Henry. And we nicknamed him John Henry, the steel driving man, after going through and doing it. But he was really good at doing instructor-centered feedback. So good that many of the students, whenever they would finish the scenario and Henry would come up to get him, says, "Okay, let's go through the debrief." You could see them. Oh God, not him again.
Yeah.
I mean, they just dreaded it, of going in, because they knew, now what he told them, everything that he said was 100% accurate. He pointed out every one of their flaws that they had when they went through the scenario. So it wasn't like he was blowing smoke or anything of that nature. He was very specific and just one after another, just hammering them in terms of, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, type of thing. As opposed to, the other instructor that was going through and doing it was doing the student-centered feedback. They look forward to going in and doing those things. You could see that in terms of their expressions of stuff going into it, and how engaged they were whenever they were going through the scenario or the feedback session. Because all of this stuff was recorded.
Yeah.
So, we could see, all of the emotions coming out in these students on it. And we also saw a difference in terms of the performance. Those that received the student-centered feedback actually performed better in subsequent scenarios than those that did the instructor-centered feedback.
And what is student-centered feedback look like? Is it more asking questions?
Yeah, and it's the student doing the talking. It's the model that I have in the
Yeah.
book. It outlines those steps that they go through, where the student is doing the talking and the instructor may be asking some leading questions. Okay, would you clarify this part for me? Why did you go through and do that? Or things of that nature.
Yeah.
And one of the side benefits out of going through and doing that was that a lot of times students would do things differently from what the instructor expected the student to go through and do, but it was a successful outcome based upon what that student did. And, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And that's the same thing when you get into some of these scenarios. And the more real it is, the more opportunities there are for different ways to go through and approach it and come out with a successful outcome.
Yeah. Great.
So that was another thing. So that got encouraged as well.
Yeah.
So, the individual thinking and problem solving component associated with going through a reality-based training scenario.
Yeah. Great. Then I'm on the right track.
I'm glad.
I'm glad to hear.
I would have expected nothing less from you, Eric.
Oh, okay, but I'm trying to pick your brain if I'm on the right path.
You're on the right path.
Great. Yes. So
I mean, I've seen some of the the video clips and stuff of things that you've done. You sent me some of those before. So
thank you.
I really enjoyed those, by the way.
Then about stress and stress exposure training. Can I first ask you about the thing we called stress? But because I'm feeling a little bit like I'm the only person asking that question, and everybody talks about stress as if it's the most clear thing. But
everybody talks about it, and most of them don't have a clue what it is.
No, and I have to admit, I also not. But I recently, for example, read a paper by the great emotional researcher Lisa Feldman-Barrett, and she stated quite clearly that stress is not the same as emotions. And you, in your research, you talk a lot about anxiety. Okay, anxiety, we have also had some research, but even about anger and all those. So it seems like emotions are also real.
The emotions are the big ticket item
Aha.
whenever it comes to stress. Because if you're going to have somebody go through and fail, that's going to be because they haven't managed their emotions. Now, that may be manifested from a variety of different ways, but let's get back to the basic definition of stress, and that is whenever you're in a situation and stress is associated with your inability to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So, and that can come from a variety of ways, whether you lack the skills to be able to go through and do it, or you've had the bejesus scared out of you, and now you're suffering from the effects of that threat identification on there, which is an emotional response. The fight, flee, freeze type syndrome that we have, and those are all emotional responses. Now, again, we can get into these things, and we talk about stressors as an example on there. Time is one of them, and in many cases, time is a self-imposed stressor, and that we have more time than what we think we have to be able to go through and solve the problem. I made the mistake in teaching the class of young kids. You talk about this generation gap. Well, what I observe, is that these students, they're new police cadets. They want to rush in and solve the problem. And I made the statement and telling them, okay, you guys need to realize you're not John Wayne. And I get this blank look on their face. And they're like, who's John Wayne? But we're talking about a national icon. So I go back through and say, okay, now for you guys to get an understanding, you need to go watch the original John Wayne movie called True Grit. And whenever he gets into the scene, he's out in the open field, he's on his horse, and he's got 4 bad guys that he's going to have to deal with. And he puts the reins in his mouth, his revolver in one hand, and his Winchester in the other. And he goes charging at them, shooting and wailing away at these guys with it. You don't have to do that, you know.
Yeah.
So, and that's what I say. So time, you know, sometimes it's a self-imposed type of thing. Yeah. Task load is another stressor that comes in, you know, where you get overwhelmed with more things that you need to go through and deal with. You got multiple individuals, multiple threats, or a combination of threats and innocence that you have to go through and do. And they're just more bodies to try to control than you've got body to control them with. And then you take a look at the level of threat. You know, if you got somebody with a bat that's 20, 30 yards away from you, that's not nearly as much threat as if you got a guy with a bazooka aimed at you and you're about 20 yards away. Obviously, there's a bigger threat perception with, you know, the bigger weapon on there.
Yeah.
And then there's other things that we get into called novelty. You know, you've never experienced anything like this before in your life. And that's one of the beauties of going through whenever we're doing the feedback session, of putting in some of those other elements of what would you do if this type of thing.
Yeah.
Because really what we're building during that feedback session is what I refer to as mental models.
Yeah.
So that what we're doing is we're implanting in things into it. So as Boyd talks about in the OODA loop, you know, when you observe and you orient, if you've got those mental models implanted on there and you go, oh yeah, this is like that, it takes less time for you to orient to that situation to make a decision of what action you're going to take. So, you know,
Yeah.
novelty is the thing on there. And then there is performance pressure, you know, just as another example of that, you know, the
Yeah.
fear of failure.
Yeah.
And this becomes very apparent in scenarios, you know, that you're running through as training wise on there. You know, how am I going to look in comparison to my fellow classmates and stuff that's going through? Or how am I looking to this instructor that I have a tremendous amount of respect for? Those types of things.
Yeah.
So those are kind of things, and that's what we refer to as the input part of the stressor concept.
Yeah.
And then you have to process it, and that process is done through the appraisal, and that's all cognitive. To a certain extent, unless you get into the immediate perception of the threat, and now you're going back into your reptilian brain to be able to go through, and you have to rely on mental models at that point in time.
Yeah.
And that's whenever, you know, fight, flee, freeze type of concept that you get into. Now, the process and that appraisal can be influenced by 3 different things. One of those is the selection of people that you have that you're going through the process. You know, if you got the opportunity to select somebody that's had 20 years as a ranger type individual in multiple combat zones and stuff of that nature, he's obviously not going to be affected by some of these threats nearly as much as what, you know, somebody that has never even been in a fight before.
Yeah.
So selection, you know, can make a difference in terms of that appraisal process. Another one is the design of the job. You know, that, you know, we can change the job around to the point to where maybe, you know, they've got more tools and resources to be able to go through and resolve the problem than what they would if they were just going in by themselves.
Yeah.
And the third intervention that we have to go through and enhance this appraisal process is training.
Mm-hmm.
Now, out of those 3, the only one that the training department or us as instructors have to really put any influence on is going to be the training one. Because most of us don't have any control over the selection process. You know, we get what we get, and we've got to make them work out of, you know, out of whatever that has. And for the most part, we don't have the authority to change the job around to where we can reduce some of the effects of the stressors and stuff of that nature. So that's kind of that process. Now, the output of that is that there's going to be, based upon the appraisal, there's going to be physiological effects, there's going to be emotional effects, there's cognitive effects, and then there are social effects as well as performance effects.
Yeah.
Now, a lady wrote a book on the physiology stuff, Astorita, and excellent book on, and I reference that in my book on there. I remember if but that's where I got a lot of the information relative to the model of, activation of the stress response and stuff of that nature. She goes into that very, very thoroughly, when we get, talking about SNS activation and things of that nature, being able to go through and handle it. A lot of the hormones that comes out of the body as a result of the perception and that appraisal process are good things. They're the things that our body needs in order to survive. That's how we're wired, and it, like I said, that's a good thing. The problem is whenever we get too much activation of that, and we are now overloaded with those hormones, and they create adverse effects in terms of our ability to go through and solve the problem. Inversely to that, if you underestimate the threat, you don't get enough of that hormone dump to be able to go through and solve it. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
But the one thing that people don't realize at times is that all of the physiological responses to that perceived threat or those stressors are all manifested because of the psychological response. So first comes the psychological, which releases the hormones, and in which case, then you get the elevations in heart rate and breathing and blood pressure, and all of those physiological indicators that says that you're stressed. And and what it is doing is all of those hormones and stuff are going to those different components to kick them up, because those are the things that we need to survive.
And what role do emotions play then? You can, because you did some research about anxiety, anger.
Excellent question. Because when we get into this thing, and we talk about the emotional component, and I looked at a variety of different ones that was on there. Anxiety is one, which is also another term for fear. Okay. And then you got anger, which is associated with control. If you feel like you don't have enough resources to control the situation, anger will be the emotion that manifests itself. And then you've got depression, and you got curiosity. Curiosity is a good thing, because if you have the curiosity, now you will perceive that threat as a challenge as opposed to an overwhelming event. But with anger, you see it as it's overwhelming, and I don't have the resources to solve it. Anxiety is fear, and again, if I got enough of that, I don't have the ability to be able to go through and solve it.
And what did you found in your research about? Was it anger that was?
What I found was that anger was the big ticket item. Is that if you go through and let me give you how I went through and did an analysis and broke it out through a statistical program, looking at all of the emotional data that I had collected through the individuals from them. And I looked at their performance data, and I did this analysis of saying, okay, which of these emotional components is the most important component that will dictate what the performance is going to be. And I looked at it as a pass-fail type of performance criteria. And what I found is that if you have elevated anger, if it's elevated, let's say above that 60th percentile, then you got a 99% chance you're going to fail that scenario.
Mm.
And it's pretty close to that, but not as high in terms of the percentile. You get a little bit more, like I said, you get to that 80 percentile, mid 70s and stuff of that nature, and then you get into the 99% failure rate.
Yeah.
So if you can't control your anxiety and your anger, or your fear and your perceived control of the situation, that's what I say. If you can't manage your emotions,
Yeah.
you can't manage the situation.
Yeah. Does this
And
sorry.
Go ahead.
Does this has any relationship with that great term I learned from you, command presence? I'm not even sure if I pronounce it very well, but it looks like me, if you have command presence, you have control over yourself.
You do have to do that. Now, some of that, is comes back from what we refer to as confidence. Confidence will affect both the anxiety and the anger component on there. And you get confidence by going through and performing through these scenarios and having realistic, challenging scenarios so that you feel like, okay, I can handle these things. Now, what it will not do is eliminate the startle response. Because I don't care how good you are, how many combat missions you've served and stuff of that nature. You go into a dark room and you hear the slide rack shut on that 870 shotgun, and the pucker factor is there. You get that startle response.
Yeah.
You know what it is, and in this case, you don't know where it is.
Yeah.
But we all know that you don't have to be that accurate with a shotgun to do a lot of damage.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that startle response is there.
Yeah.
But because of the confidence factor, you can go through and you can start to mitigate that stress response that you've got on there with the anxiety and the anger, because now you can control the level of those emotions so that they don't become overwhelming.
Yeah.
Now, one of the other things that helps in that as well is combat breathing. Where you breathe in for a count of 4, you hold it for a count of 4, you exhale for a count of 4. You do that until you feel your physiological response start to come down.
Yeah.
So you're forcing yourself to go through and do that. And what that is doing whenever you do that combat breathing is that it's activating the parasympathetic nervous system, and it's sending the other hormones to start reducing the effect that was associated with the sympathetic nervous system.
And can we make up of this that confidence is the solution to loss of control?
That confidence, yes,
is the best medicine against perceived
control.
loss of, yeah. So that means that makes training very simple. We need to
be developing their confidence. Now,
confident, yeah.
The challenge that we have is that it needs to be real confidence. Not this a false confidence is okay, I can fix everything, that false confidence will get you in trouble. Those are the guys that go in thinking that they can fix it all. They're the John Waynes.
Yeah.
They go charging in and I'll shoot them all and let God sort them out,
Yeah.
And that can get you in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. So when we move into stress exposure training, I would love to unpack it with you. I first learned about stress inoculation training in my how do you call it? In my education as a psychologist. There was, I think it had to do with anxiety. I'm not Meichenbaum.
Yeah.
And then later on, Driscoll and colleagues came with
yeah, and I worked with Driscoll
Oh,
and Joan Johnson and that.
wow,
In fact, I had his son as an intern for a while.
wow.
So,
Well,
yeah, in
beware
fact,
of the
I've
source.
co-authored with Driscoll and Joan
Yeah.
and them. So,
What is the big idea about stress exposure training?
well, stress exposure or stress inoculation. Uh, if you go back to the original, Kirchenbaum on what he was doing on there, he was dealing with phobias. People afraid of flying.
Yeah.
Or afraid to get in an elevator type of thing. So his process was one where he was looking at it from standpoint of, okay, I'm going to give them increments of this slowly, and expose them to that thing that they're afraid of, to the point to where they now have the confidence and say, okay, yeah, I can get in that elevator. I'm not worried about it collapsing and falling with me, or I can get on that airplane because it's going to make it to where it goes. So that's where he was at and what he was doing, and what we've done with the stress exposure training from our perspective is that we've taken that knowledge and experience that he gained, and we're doing that in a training environment. And in the sense that, what we're trying to go through and do is we setting up a sequence of events that these folks are going to go through and do. First of which is the information phase of it, where what we have is we got to give some people information. They have to know about some of the legal standards that we have to comply with. Because without that, they don't know what their boundaries are. And that's really what the informational stage of it is, giving individuals the boundaries of what they can or can't do legally. And then we get into the skills phase of it, where we're going through and under a controlled environment, we can go through and teach them how to do handcuffing. It just as an example, where, okay, you've got a totally compliant individual, or they may even be doing it on some kind of dummy or whatever. Where now they're just going through the physical process of being able to put handcuffs on. And then as part of that, we keep increasing the level of challenge that goes along with that whenever they're going through and doing the handcuffing, to where the individual that they're handcuffing becomes more and more resistive to that handcuffing process, less and less compliant.
Yeah.
So that now what the student is learning is the skill of putting handcuffs on with somebody that really doesn't want to have handcuffs on.
Yeah.
Which, you're lucky whenever you get a compliant suspect that says, okay, I've been here before, put your hands behind the back and, assumes the position, so to speak, as opposed to that guy that is popped up on drugs and stuff of that nature, is trying to fight you every way to Sunday,
Yeah.
And then from there, we put them into, simpler scenarios and then more complex scenarios where they're having to make some of the decisions associated with, okay, not only of how to handcuff, but when to handcuff.
Mm.
And that's one of the components that I've observed that is weak on a lot of them. We do a very good job on that basic skill of teaching them how to do handcuffs or how to place somebody under arrest. Where we fall short is in our scenarios and that application phase of when do you do that? When do you need to make that decision to go through and say, okay, I'm placing you under arrest, or, oh, I'm not placing you under arrest, but I'm going to detain you for a moment under the guidelines in our country, what we refer to as a Terry stop, where, we can handcuff somebody temporarily for officer safety concerns while we do a pat down of that individual for weapons or other items that may harm us.
Yeah.
it's very limited to what we can do, but it's there. And then once we're done, you take the handcuffs off and they're on their way. So, you know, that decision process of,
Yeah.
okay, what are the conditions that must be met in order for me to make that Terry frisk legal? Or what are the conditions that have to be met before I can say, okay, this person is under arrest? And where I say we fail in some of that part is to give you as an example. We'll take a student and we go through and we tell them, okay, yeah, you've got an arrest warrant. So we give them a piece of paper and say, that's the arrest warrant. And say, okay, now you're going to go into this room over here and place this guy under arrest. Well, when they go in the room, what they see is an individual dressed out in red man gear. So there's no decision there. It's a matter of saying, okay, somebody's going to get their butt whooped, and I'm hoping it's not me. Because he's not going to go down easy if this is going to be a fight, that I'm going to have to go through and do that. So what we've done with a lot of our training, and when we put them into some of these exercises, while yes, they are learning how to deal with, or arrest a non-compliant individual, there's no decision associated with it. And that's where we drop the ball, is we're not forcing them to make that decision of being able to go through and make some of these things. That's why I really love, the stuff that Jeff and SETCAT come up with the stress vest thing of that nature.
Yeah.
To where, you can put that underneath the shirt of somebody and you go in and you don't know out of a room full of people, which one of those guys is going to be the threat.
Yeah.
Because we're not giving them any outward indicators. Plus, we've taken away all of the protective gear, the helmet for, simunitions and the protective vests and all of that kind of stuff on there. So now we got somebody that's in regular street clothes.
Yeah.
So we can pick up on those little micro elements of pre-assault indicators.
Yeah.
So now we're forcing that student to make decisions based upon the behaviors of the individual, which is what they're going to have to do when they're out on the street.
Yeah, great.
But
yeah, can I give you my way of using stress exposure training and
absolutely.
Maybe you can give feedback. So I'm feeling a little bit like an officer now during this training, but so what I got from it was, and especially when I'm using it for stress training, not for skill, but for stress. So the first thing I do is I give a little bit of psychoeducation about stress and what the effects of stress are, how it can influence performance. Then I have some other information about scenarios and so on. And then in the second phase, I'm giving them some tools to mitigate the stress, like the breathing and other things, or imagery and so on. So yeah, simple drills. And then in the third phase, I try to let them use it in simple to complex scenarios.
Yep.
What do you, is that a?
Yeah, you're right on track with it.
Okay.
Now, just to kind of reinforce something, when you were talking about telling them about, what are the effects of stress.
Yeah.
Whenever you're going through and dealing with it, that's important, because they need to recognize that whenever they get an elevated heart rate and they're not doing something physical on there, that's a manifestation of the stress.
Yeah.
So that now that tool that you're going to teach them, they recognize, okay, I'm now encountering it. This is what I'm going to use to countermand that, or to mitigate the effects of it. And then work on that to be able to go through and do that in a controlled environment, and then in a less controlled environment, and for a more realistic scenario type basis on it. Yep.
And what I have observed in my work as a police instructor and even to today is that what I see regularly is that we give them some knowledge about stress and so on, maybe talk about some tools, but then step 2 is forgotten, and then they move into the scenario, which is too complex because the cognitive load and so on. And of
Yeah.
course, they forget to recognize and regulate their stress. Is that a
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
That's why, you know, whenever Jeff and I put the book together, we added that one segment on there. You notice there's several little diagrams that talks about the levels of stress and things
Yeah.
of that nature. You know, where, you know, you go from a simple gradual increase of stress to where maybe you got a double peak of stress and things of that nature. Those are examples of going in, and sometimes we overwhelm them right off the get-go.
Yeah.
Primarily because we don't have enough time to run enough scenarios. So we just go for the big bang right
Yeah.
off the get-go.
Yeah.
And if the student survives it, you know, then we'll, you know,
Yeah.
go for the next student on there.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's a very real problem that we have. And that's because of some of the restrictions that are placed upon us as trainers, is that, you know, what we need is a year to go through and train a police cadet, and not 6 months.
Yeah.
Because you just, you know, you cannot expose them to enough stuff
No.
within that 6 month period of time, coupled with the fact that, you know, the vast majority of that is going to be encompassed with legal issues and stuff
Yeah.
of that nature.
Yeah.
Which is all lecture-based stuff, which is the least effective way that we can train.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing that we do a lot of times, and this is again, you know, part and parcel to instructors, is when we get into defensive tactics. And that is that every instructor that they encounter wants to teach them his specialty of a defensive tactic
Yeah. Of course.
on there. So what we do is we expose students to 30 or 40 different defensive tactics during their time in the academy. And then whenever they get into a scenario, they've not practiced any of them enough to where they got any confidence whatsoever to go hands-on. And that's why whenever I got them in my scenarios and I presented them with situations that warranted them going hands-on, they never did. You know, they either wanted to go to one of their force option tools of a baton or OC or taser or a handgun, because they got a lot more practice doing those things than they ever did going through and developing those hands-on defensive tactics skills. Now, I did a study with our defensive tactics group and went through and surveyed individuals out in the you know, federal officers and agents, and asked them, okay, what are you doing? What are you using as a defensive tactic? And it came down to like there was 4 or 5 of them that they only use. So what they needed to do was, okay, I'm sorry, instructor, this is going to hurt your feelings, but these are the ones we're going to teach, and we're going to give them multiple repetitions of practicing that so that they can develop some confidence and proficiency in being able to execute it.
Yeah, I agree totally. I have to admit I've been guilty of this, because as a young man, I was doing kickboxing and boxing, and of course that was what I was teaching. And
yeah,
I think if you had told me that at that age as an instructor, it was
yeah,
it had
and it's tough to give those things up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, great, Harry. And did I forget to ask you important questions about? Did I forget something to ask you before we roll it up?
Okay, what do you got?
No, did I forget? Did I forget something to ask you?
Forget something. Oh, I see. Yeah, we forgot to talk about situation awareness.
Oh my God.
And the errors and stuff that we have, because we are not doing a very effective job of teaching situation awareness. And it's because we haven't built those things into our scenarios whenever we're exposing students to these things, nor are we going through and teaching them, you know, that middle ground of teaching them the skill. How are they going to go through and use a flashlight to search an area, or that systematic approach? whenever you're coming into a room, so that you've got a method that you're going to go through, and you're going to survey the room, conducting, your assessment of what you've got in there, whether you're executing a search warrant or if you're doing an arrest warrant or any of those types of things. We're not building those little skill exercises into it. And that's one of the things that I've started doing, and I'm doing them through, using my video-based simulator.
Yeah.
And,
Great.
and that's, I build those exercises in so that they get a chance to go through and see how to go through and do it, and then get some feedback because they can see what they've done whenever they go in there. So
Great. Yeah.
that's one of them. The other thing is that we're not doing a very good job of our evaluations, to where we're looking specifically at things like situation awareness, communication, their physical skills, and that our evaluation processes are kind of scattered all over the place, depending upon what the instructor in many cases feels is important. And I'm not saying that they're necessarily wrong, but it's not systematic, and therefore it opens the door for oversight on some of these areas, because we didn't happen to capture that.
Yeah.
And in some cases, like situation awareness, that's because we didn't build stuff in that we specifically wanted them to go through and see.
Yeah.
Or if in some cases, I've got one scenario where the individuals are responding to a disturbance, and the young lady comes out dressed in a towel, and she's saying that she's got somebody that's a peeping Tom, and she saw him around the corner of the house, and she goes around over there and she goes, yeah, there he is, that's the guy right there. And then she just continues to, okay, now go do something with him, and just interferes with the individual. And while she's interfering with him, they get distracted in dealing with her.
Yeah.
That they miss the guy going through, fumbling around, reaching in his back, pulling out a gun, and then he shoots him.
Yeah.
And the guy fumbles forever. Seems like an eternity to me. But because they're distracted, and they're not managing their situation awareness, or they're not doing what I refer to as command presence, then they're not controlling that person and say, okay, man, you go back to the house now. You don't go back to the house now, I'm going to place you under arrest as well.
Yeah.
And get them out of there. Now let me deal with my problem here.
Yeah. Great points. Yeah.
So it's a kind of a two-pronged failure thing. One, we're not building in exercises to develop the skill, situation awareness, and we're not building it into the evaluation process, as well as our scenarios, to give them an opportunity to see, okay, did they actually pay attention?
Great. There was actually a few months ago, there was a police inspector from Finland. I cannot pronounce his name, Juha Matti, whatever. And
I couldn't have pronounced it either.
No, but he had the same problem. But his problem was, we talk a lot about situational awareness, but we don't know, we haven't defined it. And he got now his PhD, and he did his dissertation about situational awareness. So that it was nice, great.
Well, just as an FYI, if you want to talk to somebody or look at something in terms of situation awareness, I would highly recommend Micah Inslee.
Who?
Micah Inslee, N-D-S-L-E-Y, I think it is.
Okay.
And she worked primarily in the aviation industry. Because
from the Ensley model, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, yeah.
And I know that, when I went through pilot training, that was major focus of what we did. Before we took off, while we were flying, and before we landed, and while we were landing, we were constantly looking and surveying and saying, okay, one, we're monitoring our instruments on the aircraft, make sure everything is working like it's supposed to. The area around us, is there something we're going to run into or need to avoid? stuff of that nature. And it's really kind of a build off of some of the stuff that of Boyd's work and
Yeah.
and his awareness and the observation component. But she has done tons of research in the area of
Great.
situation awareness,
Yeah.
and highly recommend her as an authority of someone to look at some of the concepts that she has for developing that skill.
So
that's another person I got an opportunity to work with for a while.
oh yeah, wow.
Yeah.
What is a to round it off a little bit lighter?
What would be a person you would love to have talked with, but you didn't have the chance to? Like, okay, Boyd, you've already mentioned.
Boyd is one of them. He would be on the top of my list on there. Yeah.
Kahneman just died. Kahneman.
Well, see, I've got a chance to work with and deal with a lot of great leaders. Like I said, I've had the opportunity to deal with and work with Klein and
oh yeah, wow.
Not extensively, but we sitting down and have nice discussions and stuff like that. But the one that I probably would have liked to have spent some more time with, and I'm trying to think of his name on there. He just recently passed away. One of the guys from the decision making.
Yeah, Kahneman.
Kahneman, yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Now I have sat through his lectures.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And like I said, fascinating. And I'd love to have had a chance to have worked with him.
Yeah.
Going through and picking up some more on his thoughts in terms of the decision making process and that.
And how great they're he and Klein, how they how they work together as a kind of keeping each other sharp and
Well, it was interestingly enough, whenever I sat through Kahneman's lecture, I was sitting beside Klein.
No, yeah.
Wow. Like I said, that's probably the best thing that I ever got out of my years at FLETC was getting to work with some of the really talented people out there in the world and stuff. Where I would never have had that chance to in the past.
But now you're looking at you have been for a long time in this business, and now you're looking at all the young guns, the young researchers, and the young trainers. What do you see?
Well, I tell you, there's an individual out there that I've been very impressed with. That's been doing a lot of good work on that, and that's Joel Suss.
Yeah.
Very talented individual.
Yeah.
Doing some good things.
But do you see things repeating, like life moving in cycles? Do we get any better? Or old teams new jackets?
Well, this is my theory on that. If the government would get out of the way, we could all get better.
Yeah.
And probably one of the worst things that's happened to us as a barrier to getting better is political correctness.
What does that mean? With regard to training, I mean,
well, it's a matter of we're so afraid that we're going to offend somebody that we can't look for the truth. And speak the truth. Because somebody's going to get offended, and I don't remember anywhere in any of the instruction manuals or our constitutions and stuff of that nature that says that thou shalt not be offended.
No.
That's just the reality of life, and accept it, put on your big girl panties and deal with it.
I can feel it also. Yes, it's true. It's
and it's one of those things. The government has kind of mandated a lot of these things that putting restrictions of things that we can or can't do or can't say, and that's rolled down into Okay,
Yeah.
well, you can't publish this because you're gonna offend this group and what have you. And
Yeah.
everybody's so afraid that they're gonna offend somebody
Yeah.
that they
Nobody
afraid
says,
to deal with the
yeah,
truth.
yeah, true, yeah. Well, thank you so much. Have you one piece of advice for us young trainers? It can be reading a book. It can be
Well,
your book, of course.
you know,
but yeah.
of course, I would highly recommend reading
Yeah.
mine and Jeff's book, but
Yeah.
no, I think keep the faith,
Mm,
and that what you really want to do is keep striving for improvement in these areas. You know, my mindset and my goal in life, you know, throughout my training career, stuff like, especially when I was dealing with the military or if I was dealing with law enforcement, is I wanted to make sure that whatever I did and what I presented was going to help prevent somebody's name going up on a memorial wall.
mm,
And the last thing I ever want to do is have told somebody something or done something that led to somebody name going up on a memorial wall.
yeah. That's a great mindset. Yeah.
So that's just kind of been my guiding philosophy, and I would pass that on to everybody, that there's a higher purpose to what we're doing, and
Yeah.
we need to strive to meet that purpose.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Wollert, for your service and all the great things. And,
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. You know?
yeah, it's really great and very inspiring. So I have some more years to go with that mindset.
You know,
Yeah.
one of the downsides of retirement is I don't get anybody to talk to anymore.
Yeah.
Once I
Yeah.
get started, I'm pretty hard to shut up. So.
Well, thank you so much. I will close this podcast, and I want to say you a personal goodbye.
Okay, that'd be good.
So thank you, listeners, to listening to this great conversation. To
It's been my
Terry,
pleasure.
thank you so much, Terry, and I hope everybody gets out of it a lot. Thank you, and till next time.
Okay.